Radical friendliness. I love this topic. All of what we're working with here is based on Saw's new book. It's going to be out in March, but he let me have a copy of it ahead of time. And it's really working with coming together in community. It's the art of relating and connecting from the heart. And everyone who's experienced Saw at all knows that he's all about the heart. He does a process of healing trauma that's really based on the body and on energy and not so much on the specific memories. It's about releasing things out through the body. And he also is a very heart-centered person. His mother died just over a year ago. Part of this book is very much informed by that experience, as is his teaching. I just picked a couple of different quotes from here about relationship and community helping us shelter from the storm meaning life, and how we all long for community. Part of that is heart-based, and part of it is nervous system-based. Our nervous systems evolved over millennia to support each other in staying alive. And we need to do that on a physical basis, but we also need to do that through our hearts. That's a big part of what we're doing in this community is we're practicing connecting with each other, practicing safe enough connections. Sacred friendship, which I also think would be accurate in terms of describing the relationship that many of us here have with each other, is built upon radical friendliness. Just like with meditation, the deep stillness in our mind is always here. What gets in the way of us realizing that is thoughts in the mind, nervous system dysregulation, fear, anxiety. We get compelled kind of or in a trance of what's going on that level. It would be natural for us to connect with everyone with love, and we need to be liberated from our conditioning and from the delusion that we're separate. So even though this work is quite practical, daily life, psychological in a way, it's also based on spiritual foundation. And I think it probably starts as a concept of, is that true that we're all innately good? Then why do so many people do so many awful things? And he's going even further and saying, people don't have to be innately good. They don't have to behave well in order for us to still love them. And that would include us as well. Part of what he's doing here is he's saying, we need to make space for other people as they are. And when we do that, we also make space for ourselves. The inner critic, shaming ourselves, those are really common experiences and obstacles. And one of the ways that we can work with that is by practicing accepting other people. I love what he said here, invest in that person's reality. Just like your life, their life is full. They have dreams, goals, joys, sorrows. They are a real person who has lived a specific life. With all of the polarization and one side, the other side that happens so much now, it's a real example of how when we narrow people down to just one thing, the way they vote or what they believe about certain things, that we're missing a lot of the picture. The word that comes to mind is become more mature and really acknowledge that people can be all of these things, the same person as we can. So selfish and kind, small-minded and generous. We have this paradox of who we are and how we engage with the world day to day and how we engage within ourselves. We know something about a lot of the people that we're around, and we don't know everything about them. If we accept the idea that it's possible to love complicated people, to love people who make mistakes, maybe it's also possible to love ourselves. And many of us are on that journey and have been for a long time. So it makes it a little bit more difficult in some ways, and it also perhaps opens things up in other ways when we bring that forward. I'm working on loving myself, being more supportive, kinder. I can probably do that fairly easy with people who I really like and love and who are easy to be with. And there are also really difficult people, perhaps in our personal life, but certainly in the public life, who make that a real challenge. So that's a deep practice. So let's go into some of this inquiry. Affirming the good in others does not mean it's all good. It does not mean that they don't have things that are really harmful that they're doing. There's behaviors that might be really dangerous to us personally. If we even just think about the way some people vote, as someone in the queer community, it's very apparent to me that some people will vote for someone who's dangerous to my life and my survival and my right to be who I am. And that's not a deal breaker for them. And that changes how I experience them. And we also need to be able to see that in a clear way, not to dismiss it, and to see it in a way that we can keep some open heartedness and some willingness to see other people as a complex human being. So when you validate someone's feelings, you validate that their experience matters, you're validating their worth. When we remind people of the best in themselves, we are connecting with them, and we're also helping them to connect with their own fundamental goodness. If we go back to ourselves as well as other people, we all have ups and downs. We all have capacity that sometimes we really know our own basic goodness and that of other people. And other times there's a lot that is obscuring it. So this is a practice. It's not something that we're going to do perfectly. And it might be very challenging. Certainly, it's easier with some people and with others. What's happening in your nervous system right now, and what's happening as you're considering that? So, to truly connect to a person, and this helping them heal, that's a bit of an underground agenda, perhaps, but in an open hearted way. I really want to connect with this specific person. Bring to mind someone who's not too challenging for you, but somebody who is difficult. And if you were to bring image of them to mind, or maybe there's some memories of recent interactions, let yourself see that, feel into that. What's in the way of radically accepting that person? We're accepting their emotional experience. Doesn't matter that we don't agree with it. We're just saying this is how they see things. And when the way they see things is something that's difficult for us, how might you have a conversation with them? We're always wanting to do this from grounded, emotionally regulated, where we can tolerate that someone else doesn't see this the way we do, even if it feels like it's somewhat of a threat to us. Let yourself get really specific here. One person or maybe two, but not the whole world, not left wing voters or right wing voters or something like that. Specifically, someone that you're in relationship with. And imagine what they might say. Most people are pretty predictable, so you could probably imagine that. You've probably heard it many times, perhaps. And let yourself be aware of your breath. Notice how your body feels. We can open our eyes if they're closed, look around, hold our own hand. If you have a very persistent set of words or something's persistent, a visual, you could put that into a frame on the other side of the room, taking your eyes around the empty space outside of the frame. You can use all of these tools that we're familiar with. So they're saying whatever it is. It's not so important to me how you feel about it. This is how I'm voting. I have my own reasons. I'm not going to change because of the way you feel. Whatever it might be, that's just an example using voting, but what might they say? And then see if you could pause. This is not a real thing, this is an inquiry. So pause, really notice what's happening in your body as you're watching them in a way in your mind, watching them say this thing or tell you what it is that you don't agree with. And then what might you say to them? Not about agreeing or disagreeing, but just validating that that is their experience. What are some possible things you might say? And see yourself saying them or say them out loud if you can, if you're in that kind of environment where you can do that. Notice what that feels like. Do you feel like you're betraying yourself? We're not saying, I agree with you. We're saying, I understand this is how you see this. Maintain that awareness of your breath, of your body, and notice if you're going into any kind of a nervous system response, a survival response. You might be going into a fight response. You might be doing some deep breaths, but meanwhile, inside, you're like, but you're wrong. See what's going on inside as you're validating their emotional experience. And notice how they might react. So, especially if you've had this conversation or some version of it many times, and in the past, you always kind of get into a bit of an argumentative, aggressive, confrontational energy around it. If you were to say, I really see that that's how you feel about this, maybe you could ask them more. If you're angry about this, would you tell me more about that? Or what is it you're feeling right now as we're having this conversation or as you're thinking about how you see this? That's another way that we might validate that their experience matters. We want to know more about it. And as we're doing that, we could also notice what is our assumption? How are we framing this? Is it, well, this person's being mean and abusive? Is it something more like they're wrong? They're not seeing it clearly? Is it something like, I really see they just don't have the capacity right now to see it through my eyes, for instance? We're not looking at, in this particular part of it, about what we believe. We're really looking at, they believe this thing. This is how they see it. And can we acknowledge that that's the way it is without getting into a fight about it? And if there's any inner critic, any shaming yourself, see if you could really let that go. This is really difficult, partly because it feels like a threat. It feels like we need to protect ourselves. And it also might be that when this happens, you generally go into a freeze response or into fawning. So you feel like, I can't really stand up for myself here. I feel like it's not okay for me to have this experience that I have. You might not be getting validated from them. That's very likely. And could we still validate ourselves? If you shift for a minute away from that person, could you validate that your emotional experience is whatever it is? And there's nothing wrong with us because we have the experience that we have. This isn't about trying to convince them. This is just about, for me, can I validate that my experience is valid? It matters. So, to connect to a person, we have to radically accept that person. It doesn't mean that we need to be in relationship with them. It doesn't mean we're not going to set boundaries. It means that that's how they are. You were to look at them, bring up their face again, bring up their words, whatever comes to mind when you think about them. I accept that that is how they are. That's how they think. That's how they feel. At this moment, at least, that's their behavior, their mindset. And notice what that feels like inside to say, I accept that person as they are. And part of what we're looking at here, too, is that we're accepting that someone is multidimensional. They have a very specific life. There are a lot of things we know about them, a lot of things we don't know about them. And could we have that compassion in our relationship with them, even when we don't agree with them? I accept that's who they are, and I can still feel love, compassion, friendliness. There might be some other words that apply towards that person, even though it's complicated. They don't have to be perfect for me to have an open heart with boundaries, probably, but I can accept them with love and compassion. I accept that just like me, they want to be free from suffering. They want to feel safe. They want to be accepted, validated, connected. Can I use that compassion to build a bridge between us? And for the last couple of minutes of the inquiry, let's really work with that bridge. We're not ignoring the difficulties. And we know that the difficulties and the differences are not all of that person. It's not all of me either. What might a bridge look like? How could love and compassion and open heartedness allow us to connect on a deeper level with that person, to accept who they are? If you wanted, you could put your hand on your heart, open your eyes, look around, notice that you're safe where you are, and notice that that person's not sitting in front of you having a conversation. We're doing an inquiry. If you need to do something active to shake it out of your body, you could stand up and shake. You could do some cyclic sighing. You could hold your hand, give yourself a hug. There's a lot of ways to come back into regulation. And also to check in with yourself around your willingness to work with this. And if there's someone really difficult that you were working with, maybe you could do some practices with doing it in a little bit of a smaller way with somebody else, someone who's not so challenging. Or maybe with that person, but something where you're more in sync. Let yourself feel into that as well. What might you do going forward? And to let ourselves be completely okay with that's not something I'm going to work with this person right now. And that can be okay too. We can love and validate and accept our own self and give ourselves that love and compassion as well.